Chapter 20. A 1,000-year-old cultivated snake. So I was out delivering wine to my neighbor today, and look what I almost stepped on. But don't be afraid. Look at the tail. It's pointed. I couldn't see the head. It was hidden. This is only half the snake. But it is a gopher snake, one of the good guys. The other good guy snakes are king snakes. So I'm going to show some pictures. Warning. Snake pictures about to appear. Here we go. In our area, we see both kinds. This kind right here, and I've also seen the red ones as well. These are also very, very good snakes. In fact, they will eat rattlesnakes. So, enough of the snake lessons. Again, what we're looking for here are rounded heads and pointed tails are good. When they don't have a rattle, when they don't have a triangle head, those are the good guys. If they have a rattle and a triangle head, then they're a viper and venomous. So let's go to the story. And it'll be chapter 20. The 1,000-year-old cultivated snake. Please spray the weeds with Roundup. Why do you want me to put chemicals into the ground, into the vines, and into your wine? Are you trying to kill me? Said Sheila. If you don't spray, I won't be able to see a snake. I'll cut the grass for you, Paul promised, and marched to the vineyard with Bluey and shovel and thrust the blade at the base of the weed stalks to sever them, leaving the roots below. Mother Earth needs her vegetables. The yellow mustard grew like a turnip, and Paul sliced its green leaves above ground, leaving the tasty turnip in the earth to nourish her. He encouraged this weed to grow on the vineyard's steep sections as a natural cover crop to prevent erosion, and appreciated its beauty, going so far as to compliment Stephanie as the yellow mustard of California, her skin the shade of appetizing curry. There's no need to water weeds around the trunks in the irrigation zone, so he pulled those out, roots and all. Then he took clippers and trimmed weeds outside the drip zone by hand. He could have done this faster with a weed whacker, but then the vineyard floor wouldn't certifiably be hand-trimmed. His aim to create artistic, handcrafted wines. A farmer without a shovel is a Marine without a rifle, and Paul carried his shovel whenever he entered the vineyard to hack a weed, dig a gopher trap, and protect himself. Every few steps, he jabbed the shovel here, plunged it there, toppling tall weeds that fell like Douglas firs in a northwest forest. Timber! Paul spent hours vineyarding, crisscrossing the property with his dog and his shovel, cutting a weed here, binding up a fallen vine there, Bluey shadowing his every move, 2 rows above or 2 rows below, following a trail of shade, except when the sun was so hot, his instinct drove him under a bush, from where he watched until he could no longer see where his lamb had gone, and trotted to the next shady spot to maintain a line of sight. The day Paul vowed to cut the grass, he finished 2 rows out of 57. At this pace, it would take him a month to trim the whole vineyard, without factoring in time needed for shoot thinning, by which time the first rows would have reverted to overgrown savanna. He browsed weed whackers at Grangetto's, the salesman recommending the most expensive and powerful one. He showed Paul how to thread the line, wind it like a yo-yo, start the engine, and when he brought his new tool into the vineyard, he pulled the power cord. The engine roared, and the head spun off. The machine was useless. He hid it in the shed from Miguel, and angrily stormed into the vineyard with shovel and clippers and slayed another row before dark. The next day, he left on a business trip, and Sheila took things into her own hands. When he returned, all the paths were brown. Why did you spray herbicide in the vineyard? He asked. So I can see the snakes. I told you I was cutting the grass for you, he fumed. You're too slow. Besides, we have to protect Bluey from foxtails. This prompted Paul to learn how to repair the weed whacker, and weed poison was never used again. Each spring, as he thinned shoots, he bent down and used clippers to trim weeds by hand, believing this was a secret to great wine and why theirs tasted better than Joe's, whose rows were immaculately clean and clear, casualties of chemical Ali. "Hey, patron, don't we need goggles and a mask?" Rodrigo asked his boss. "No, the sheen ain't strong," replied Miguel, and they sprayed up and down the rows where you'd never see a weed. When Sheila called snakes God's creatures, she was onto something. Snakes got a bad rap in the Vineyard of Eden, framed by the grapevine, the real villain. Rattlesnakes are wanderers that keep slithering in search of food or a mate. They're not territorial, but will stick around an area with abundant food. Paul's property, neglected a decade before he and Sheila moved in, offered sanctuary to a Noah's Ark of critters, and with food in abundance, so were snakes. Once the land was cleared, the critters dispersed, and so did most of the stakes. The odds of confronting a snake were quite low, on average 1 or 2 encounters a year. Specifically, if snakes are active 180 days a year, and you met one twice a year, the probability seeing one are 1.11111%, with the last digit continuing past the end of the page until it meets the number pi at the end of time. You learn the difference between sounds of a cicada, an irrigation backfire, and a rattle. So as not to scare you from buying a house out here in the country, let's say the odds of not seeing a snake are good, about 99%, although the favorable odds decrease a bit in summer when the weather's hot and snakes are more active, and in August when baby snakes emerge and haven't learned to avoid humans. When Paul stepped outside, he reminded himself, "Haven't seen a snake in a while, so there's probably one on the way." Just because he was slightly paranoid didn't mean they weren't out to get him. And maybe he had good reason. Perhaps there was one out to find him. In the garage turned into a winery, Paul set a mousetrap behind the clothes dryer where there were telltale signs of a mouse outhouse. Mice were noble in that regard, like dogs, cats, and rabbits, who kept their living areas clean. When he inspected the next morning, he noticed a tail. "Got you!" And as he stepped closer, he realized that was no ordinary mouse tail. He had caught a shark in a trout stream, for in the trap was a snake, very much alive. He looked at the markings, recalling Snake Man's advice. Red on yellow, kill a fellow, and saw red and black stripes, and recited, "Red on black, okay, Jack." It was a king snake, one of the good guys, and Paul needed to rescue him. How do you release a snake from a mousetrap? Very carefully, for although the king snake isn't poisonous, it doesn't mean they don't bite. Doing his best Snake Man imitation, he grabbed the serpent behind the head with his right hand to secure his jaws, and used his other hand to lift the bar of the trap. The trap fell from the body, and Paul carried the snake to the ivy behind the house and let him go, saying, "You're welcome to live on our property. May you eat mice, rats, and ground squirrels. May you protect us from rattlesnakes. Live long and prosper. Peace be with you." The snake, sensing he had found a sanctuary, made the area his home, appearing every year or two, usually when the lady of the house was taking out the trash or heading to the vineyard. One of the mysteries of good snakes is, are they loyal pets? I'll let the community of herpetiles answer. This I know for sure. A king snake can save your life, but don't ever kiss a rattlesnake, even when it's frozen. One day, the king snake was patrolling the French terrace for mice and paused under the door. Paul had the mean streak of his father's cousins in his blood and thought of asking Sheila to step outside to the terrace, but saved her life by letting her finish vacuuming inside, oblivious to the surprise waiting for her. King snakes are the good guys, immune to rattlesnake venom, and eat the viper's young. Paul thought the snake on the terrace was on the hunt for mice, or better yet, Templeton the rat, who used the ledge of a lower window above the garden as his toilet. These droppings dirtied the ledge of a picture window with a view of majestic mountains, and when you looked down, your eyes were treated to a garden of peonies and orchids, the view now sullied. The king snake slowly slithered from the door into this garden of orchids, iris, and bottle palms, slid under the ledge displaying Templeton's feces, and did a U-turn, around the farthest orchid to rest in the sun. Paul sat down to work on his computer to take a break from work outside, and when he returned was surprised to see the snake back on the French terrace, sipping water from Bluey's dish. Paul never found a rattlesnake in the same spot twice, though he remembered all the locations he saw one, reliving the sighting each time he passed. 90% of winemaking is preparation. Paul hauled a pig bin the size of a hot tub to the driveway to hose it down, then washed buckets and containers for the upcoming harvest. He opened the door to the winery, lifted the pig bin to bring it inside, and there it was, a large snake by his foot. He instinctively looked for the diamond triangle patterns, but couldn't find them. This snake's skin, white as moisturizing pearl cream. The snake hissed and let loose a rattle with lyrical rhythm, warning Paul to stay back. The snake cocked, ready to strike, slid back defensively, facing Paul. The serpent had several opportunities to strike Paul when he walked right by her. Since she was kind enough not to harm him, he reciprocated and decided not to kill her. He scooped her up with the rod of his shovel, dropped her into a fermenter, and released her at the entrance of Squirrel City. The first white snake Paul saw was in Beijing, where Christine took him to see the Peking opera, Forbidden Love, in which a young man falls for a beautiful woman, who's really a 1,000-year-old cultivated snake. The relationship between Paul and Christine was also forbidden, and at the zenith of their mutual admiration, infatuation, and affection, Paul cut her from his life cold turkey without a goodbye. Perhaps her feelings for him weren't severed. Could Paul, by nature a spiritual being in touch with the earth and the vines, have fallen under the spell of a 1,000-year-old cultivated snake when visiting China's mystical West Lake? How could a serpent possibly travel across an ocean in search of her mate? A mythical snake with magical powers could transform herself into a dragon and swim across the sea, or hitch a ride, probably not aboard an airplane, but on a cargo ship steaming from Shanghai to Long Beach. She could stow away inside a 40-foot container, feed on vermin during the voyage, and, after arriving, get the hell out of the harbor as fast as possible, into the hills and down to San Diego County. If Father Junipero Serra could travel from Spain to Mexico City, to Baja, and up the coast of Alta California, establishing missions from San Diego to San Francisco, if Carrie Ann could plant a vineyard and make wine, why couldn't a snake on a mission, or a crazy ex-girlfriend, complete as fantastic a voyage?